Good evening and welcome again to Any Given Tuesday. We are your hosts, Evan Mercer
Lee Johnson
and Sanjay Ramaprasad.
And we have a wonderful array of topics to debate tonight. But first, let's get started with what we witnessed last week. We're going to talk about the big one of this past week, Texas A&M getting completely shut down by Alabama, 33-14. Lee and Sanjay, what are your takes on this game we saw?
I'm honestly not too surprised. Going into it, I thought Alabama would win by 20 points. They won by 19 points, so I think it cements what we already knew about the teams. Alabama's run defense was stifling. Texas A&M really couldn't get it done, and apart from a 10-minute stretch where they scored both their touchdowns, they were completely shut down the whole game.
That's true. A&M, first and foremost, is a running team. Trevor Knight is not the greatest throwing quarterback, and you cannot run against this Alabama defense. They will shut you down, and Texas A&M tried to keep their strategy, and it just did not work. They got a couple touchdowns, but they still just lost pretty badly.
Last week I was pretty high on Texas A&M running offense with Trevor Knight and Trevion Williams completely dominating the other competition. But this week, they were held to 114 yards of total rushing offense compared to Alabama's 287. Now, would you say that this is an exposure of Texas A&M or just a demonstration of how great Alabama truly is?
I think this is just a demonstration of how good Alabama is. First, we knew Texas A&M's defense was good, not great, and Alabama used its normal run-first strategy to open up its passing game and still run for a very respectable number. And honestly, this just shows this Alabama defense might honestly be the best in the nation. They held one of the best rushing attacks to only 140 yards with a dual-threat quarterback who they've historically had some problems with, and a very good running back to very low gains. This is a masterclass by the Alabama defense.
Yeah, not only did they shut down Texas A&M's offense, they also got another touchdown themselves. Jonathan Allen with a fumble recovery. And I'd say Jonathan Allen right now, they have a lot of great players on the defense, but I'd say he's the number one right now out of all of them. What do you guys think?
There's so many to pick from. I'm loving Tim Williams right now. He's just an excellent pass rusher, and he's been able to shut down all the offenses they play. And, it's like they keep scoring touchdowns on defense and special teams. And it's not even fair how good they are on doing that. They're completely on another level when it comes to their defense.
That's true. This is one of the best scoring defenses I've seen in a very long time. And honestly, it's so hard to pick a player of this. I might just have to do what you did last week. This entire Alabama defense needs to be recognized as a unit. The way they work together and the way they amplify their strengths, absolutely fantastic.
Definitely does hurt, though. They lost Eddie Jackson. He left the game with an injury, and it turns out he broke his leg, and he's going to be out for the season. How do you guys think they're going to react to losing a captain of the team like that, an upperclassman, and will they still have an elite pass defense, especially after this?
You're obviously going to see a decrease in talent. I mean, Eddie Jackson was a punt returner as well, so that's 2 or 3 touchdowns you might be missing in the future, which is a ton for them. So I think you're definitely going to see an impact, but Jonathan Allen, Tim Williams, the whole defense can still make up for that.
That's true. You're definitely going to see an impact because this was such an influential player for their defense. But I think Alabama's the team where you see the least impact. I think their depth will be able to at least if not replace, cover up this weakness in their defense and still allow it to shine.
I think it's going to be a bit more impactful than what you guys are saying, honestly, right now. Their secondary, obviously it's still strong, but it is the weakest unit of their defense so far, I would say. It doesn't have very much depth at all. And losing an All-American like Eddie Jackson, I think it could have serious issues for them. And I'm not sure if they play any great passing defenses that can take advantage of it in regular season SEC play. But in the playoff, if they go against a team with a great passing offense like Washington, for example, I think it could be a serious problem.
That's true, but I guess we're going to have to wait till the playoff to see if this weakness can be exposed. But the next game of the week honestly competed with this game for highlight of the week, which had Ohio State upset by the Penn State Nittany Lions 24-21 on the back of a blocked field goal for a touchdown. Evan, Lee, what does this mean? Is Penn State back? Is Ohio State out of the playoffs?
I kind of want to agree that Ohio State, they still have a strong shot. Like Michigan, obviously, they have a lot of stuff to prove, but they're still in the lead of their division, their conference. It's a really bad loss that reflects poorly on them, but they still have they're going to make it to the championship as long as they don't drop any other games. They're going to be able to play Michigan, and they have another chance to prove themselves. So they might not be the 1 or 2 seed they wanted in the playoffs, but it's still, as long as they win out, they're going to be number 4 seed and make the playoffs.
I think it's true that if they win out, they'll make the playoff. But after seeing this performance, I don't really see how you could say they'll win out most likely. I feel like Michigan has to be favored going into this game, and I wouldn't even be surprised if Ohio State lost another game before then even. Penn State is not a great team. James Franklin hasn't had any victories over his highly ranked team that his entire career at Penn State, and I think this does speak badly for Ohio State. These last few years, they've had a lot of trouble sometimes scoring a lot of points against good but not great defenses, and this game, again, they couldn't get it done, and they lost because of that.
That's true. Again, for Penn State, this was supposed to be more of a development year. They had some young players on this team, both on the offense and the defense, and they were trying to build up for maybe a run in the next 1 or 2 years. But to beat Ohio State, this just reflects really badly on them. Like you guys said.
Really well on Penn State.
Really well on Penn State, very badly on Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And honestly, this just showed like their offense, while looked okay, but their defense exposed once again against a Penn State offense that isn't quite as good as the talent they're going to be playing in the playoffs against even Michigan or in the Big Ten championship. So this shows some troubling signs in Ohio State.
I think Ohio State's defense is still good, but their offense, if they go up against a good defensive line like Penn State had, they're going to struggle a lot. So if we see an Ohio State and Alabama matchup again, it's going to be game over for Ohio State before it even begins.
Yeah, 2 years ago, Ezekiel Elliott ran all over Alabama in that Sugar Bowl, but I could not see that happening again this year with Ohio State, how they looked so far, and how Alabama's defensive line has looked so far. I wouldn't see a repeat of 2014.
That's true. The O-line isn't quite as talented as it used to be. They don't have that same kind of running back that Ezekiel Elliott was, a very, very good talent. And honestly, now all the pressure of this offense is shouldered on JT Barrett. And while he's an efficient quarterback, he's a good quarterback. He might not be ready to take on the entire brunt of the Ohio State offense.
I'd agree with that. Well, if we want to talk about the rise of teams like Penn State, we really need to discuss Auburn. Starting off slow this season with 2 early losses, Auburn has gathered up steam and absolutely demolished Arkansas last week, 56-3. What do you guys think about that? That's a crazy scoreline. That's something you'd expect to see if Auburn plays Troy or South Alabama, not an SEC rival like Arkansas.
That's true. So far this year, Arkansas's looked good. They haven't looked great, but they haven't looked bad either. They've just looked good. They've beaten teams like Ole Miss. They've beaten some of the weaker teams they're supposed to beat. But then they go up against Auburn, and they lose 56-3. Austin Allen's supposed to be the best quarterback in the SEC.
Yeah, we said that.
Yeah, we all have said Austin Allen's the best quarterback in the SEC. But to put up 3 points in the entire game, that just shines a really bad light on this Arkansas offense and a terrible light on their defense. They let up 56 points to an Auburn team that, like I said, they've been building up steam. They weren't supposed to be one of the best in the SEC, but after this game, are they?
You know, like Auburn didn't have that much passing offense. It was only 89 yards from Sean White. Instead, they had 543 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns from, and then like the star player was Cameron Petaway with 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. And when you have almost 550 yards on you as a defense, that speaks pretty poorly about you, I would say.
That's video game numbers right there. 543 rushing yards, that's insane. I don't know if that has to be some sort of SEC record recently at least. And I think that it does show Auburn has a legit offense, and they could be a threat to Alabama even maybe. I would say they're still going to be the underdog because there's no way they're running for 500 yards against Alabama. But with a team like an offense like that could be a problem for Alabama.
I don't know if it's going to be as big of a problem for Alabama because like we've seen with A&M and other teams, you just can't run against Alabama. And this Auburn offense really relies, as we've seen, almost 550 yards on the ground. They rely on that running offense. And I don't know if their passing game is going to be good enough to beat a team like Alabama. But this was a great win for them, and it's looking good for them ahead.
For me, it really shows that Auburn is a legitimate team. Before last week, I would have said, Arkansas is going to run away with this game. I got proven completely wrong, and now I'm going to start taking Auburn seriously. And I like to think that Vanderbilt had a chance against Auburn before this game. Now, I'm kind of straying away from that, maybe off the optimism a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Auburn, do they have a playoff chance right now? It sounds a little crazy. They have 2 losses, but if they beat Alabama, one of their early losses was to Clemson, probably another playoff team by only 1 score. Could they make it to the playoff?
I think they could, but that relies incredibly heavily on beating Alabama, which I really don't think they can do. But yes, like if they beat Alabama, they'll have they have a good resume and a good shot. They're a 2-loss team, but again, when you said one of the losses to Clemson, another possible playoff team. So I think they really do have a chance. They'd have the best chance of any 2-loss team of getting in if they managed to beat Alabama.
I think we've seen in the past that Clemson and A&M they lost to. They were both high-tier defenses. And now they're going against Alabama, the best defense. I don't think they can do that. They won't be able to. I'm saying Auburn, they're going to lose to Alabama. They don't really have a chance to make the playoffs.
That's fair.
And finally, we had the honor of watching a good old Western shootout between the Oklahoma Sooners and the Texas Tech Red Raiders with a final score of 66-59, with Oklahoma taking the win. And in this game, defense was completely optional. There's one errant turnover and then a whole bunch of yards. Both teams had 850 yards exactly for both sides, and there was just no stopping of any teams. And there's not really much to contend on this other than does Oklahoma have a playoffs? I just want to bring up what a ridiculous game that was.
Yeah, and honestly, defense is optional might have been the tagline of the Big 12 over these past few years. These games have become, at least not common, but more reasonable for teams in the Big 12 than any other conference. They have a lot of, I think it's because like with Oklahoma and even Texas Tech, they have these high-powered offenses led with great passing attacks, great running attacks, but the talent really isn't there on the other side of the ball to stop them. So you get scores like 66-59, and honestly, this wasn't great for Oklahoma because, again, its defense was even worse than preseason pundits had predicted. But at least on the offensive side, Baker Mayfield looked amazing. Patrick Mahomes also absolutely fantastic. So there were some good things in this game for Alabama. I mean, Oklahoma, I'm sorry.
I think we need to highlight even more Patrick Mahomes. You said he's amazing. That doesn't even do him justice. I believe he set the NCAA record for most total yards in the game. He threw for 734 yards and 5 TDs. Then he ran for 85 more yards and 2 TDs. That's an unbelievable performance, and it's a little sad that his defense is so bad and they're losing these games, because otherwise I really believe he would be a Heisman contender if his defense didn't allow 66 points in games.
Mm-hmm. If he was on an Alabama team, or even, like, let's say he had a Vanderbilt-style defense, he would be going amazing places with this. But his defense, I don't understand. Like, you have one of the best offenses in the country, and the coach can't even recruit a defense for this. A high school defense would even be better.
To be fair, they've had a lot of instability on defense with 7 defensive coordinators, I believe, in the last 9 years. This guy, it's his second year. Hopefully they can get some stuff going, as he's been there for a while and he recruits more defensive players. But yeah, it's a little embarrassing that a Big 12 program like this has fallen to such levels where, is it even surprising they allowed 66 points to a conference rival?
Honestly, it's sad to say, but it might not be. This is the kind of, like, these quarterback shootouts are the kind of thing you see in the Big 12, but honestly, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where this conference goes in the future.
Another question then. Who do you think is going to win the Big 12? Oklahoma, Baylor, or some other wild card?
Right now, I'm thinking it's Baylor. So far, they are undefeated. They've shown that they can win their games. And Oklahoma has had some bad losses earlier in the season. And so far, the rest of the teams in the Big 12 haven't looked like as good as these two teams. So I'm inclined to say Baylor.
I'm probably going to go with Oklahoma, actually. Even though they have 2 losses so far, neither of those are in Big 12 play. So conference-wise, they're undefeated in conference play. And I think they're honestly a better team. Baylor and West Virginia are both still undefeated, but they have not really impressed me so far with any quality wins over great teams. I guess West Virginia has a win over TCU, but I don't think TCU is that good. So I'll say Oklahoma for now.
See, I'm riding on the Mountaineer train. I think West Virginia, they've shown themselves to have a great defense. They shut down Texas Tech, who put up 59 points on Oklahoma. West Virginia only allows 17 points from Patrick Mahomes and his crew. So this defense for West Virginia is great. They also have a great offense with Skylar Howard, and we'll actually be able to talk about that in the next segment.
Yes, we will. And for this next segment, it's currently week 8 of the season, and the playoff window has already closed for most teams. However, these 9 special teams have remained undefeated up to this point and hope to finish out their schedule strong. We're going to debate these teams, what their record says about them, where they could go, are they going to stay undefeated, and what are their chances of making these playoffs. And our first team will be Western Michigan. So far, they have wins over Northwestern, the FCS school, North Carolina Central, Illinois, Georgia Southern, Central Michigan, Northern Illinois, Akron, and Eastern Michigan. And so for the rest of their schedule, they have Ball State, Kent State, Buffalo, and Toledo. So what do you guys think? Can they stay undefeated?
Well, I know Evan. He's a big fan of them. He's talked to them before, and they're definitely a good team. But when I look at their schedule, I see just a whole bunch of directional Midwestern schools. And honestly, I don't think it shows that they're really a great team. I do think they can go undefeated, though. I think the remainder of their schedule is pretty bad. Of these teams that we're going to list, I think they definitely have the easiest schedule. And while I don't think they're a great team, I think they're definitely a good team. Zach Terrell, you've talked to him before. He's a good quarterback. I would expect them to go undefeated this year.
I would expect them too. The biggest competition left on their schedule is Toledo. They've lost some talent on that, but I fully expect the Broncos to win this out easily. Maybe get a New Year's Six bowl game and pull off another Houston, upset one of the Power 5 teams. That's what I hope to see. But for regular season at least, and for the conference championship, I expect them to see 13-0, easy, undefeated season for them.
Yep, I definitely expect to see these guys go undefeated. When Toledo is the highlight of the remaining schedule, you know it's going to be a pretty easy walk through. And honestly, these guys, they are a good team. They're distinctly good. I don't know if they're going to quite have the ability to make one of those New Year's Six bowls, but they definitely will make it to an upper tier bowl and maybe beat one of the Power 5 teams that are there. But so far, they've beaten the teams that they're supposed to beat, and honestly, and they really haven't played any strength of schedule like I can consider good. So I don't know. They're going to be an interesting team to see in the bowls.
Yeah, for the reason that their strength of schedule is so poor, I would have to say they have a 0% chance of making the playoff, really regardless of whether they go undefeated. I think Power 5 one-loss and maybe even two-loss teams would make it in over them. So I think really the best they can hope for is one of those other New Year's Day bowls other than the playoff ones. Do you agree?
I agree with that. I think, they beat Northwestern, they beat Illinois. Granted, Illinois is not that great, but Northwestern, they've been on a we talked about them last week with their Justin Jackson running back. They have decent talent, and they're 4-3 right now. They've shown themselves to be pretty good. So I think Western Michigan has shown that they can hang with the big boys, or the medium boys of the big conferences. So I like Western Michigan. I'm a strong favorite that they go 100% undefeated.
Yeah, I definitely think they're going to go undefeated. There is no chance of these guys making the playoffs. When your best win is against a mid-level team in the Big Ten, it doesn't say great things about your schedule. But yeah, I think that if they go undefeated, they do have a chance of making one of those New Year's Six bowls and maybe upsetting one of the teams there, but that's about the best they can hope for.
All right, next we'll be moving on to one of those other G5 teams, but one with a slightly stronger resume and one with a lot more name recognition from past years, Boise State. Some of their top wins this year are over Washington State, Oregon State, and a thriller last week versus BYU. The remainder of their schedule isn't that strong again, but I would say a little bit harder than Western Michigan with games against Wyoming, San Jose State, Hawaii, UNLV, and Air Force. They've had some very close wins, though, so far, so I'm not totally sold on them going undefeated. What do you guys think?
Well, you're right. About the biggest win that most impressed me was the win over Washington State. I mean, Washington State, they've been on a tear recently, and one of their two losses came to an FCS team and then Boise State. And their offense is, for one of the top in the G5, they have Brett Rypien, who's been an incredible quarterback for this team. He's got a great receiver to throw to, Thomas Burbeck, who seems to take a touchdown every time he gets the ball. And then the running back, they have a solid running offense with Jeremy Nichols. And their offense, they're 15th in the country right now. It's hard to take them down, and I fully expect them to go undefeated right now. For me, the biggest competition comes from Air Force, actually. They've shown themselves to be a tough team to take down. I think Boise State, again, they have all the tools, and they have an easy enough schedule to make it undefeated.
That's true. I definitely think they have a very strong possibility of going undefeated. The strength of their schedule that they're going to face is lower than the one they've already faced. And while they had to have some close wins against some of the teams they faced so far, I think the rest of the teams are just weak enough that they're going to be able to get victories over all of them and go undefeated. But I'm not sure if they have any playoff chance, honestly. They do have a better strength of schedule than Western Michigan had, but I still don't think it's going to be enough to get in over some of those one-loss teams from the bigger conferences.
I don't even think they're going undefeated. You guys seem to be sold on that, and I agree they're better than all the teams they're going to play probably the rest of the year. But this win over BYU last week was very close. They've had a lot of other wins by single digits, and I think it's likely they're going to slip up at least once in the rest of the season. But I would agree with Sanjay, though, that even if they go undefeated, they won't be making the playoffs probably. But since they have a lot of name recognition, it's more likely than Western Michigan, but it would require a whole heap of things to happen.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to have Michigan, Louisville, Clemson all have a lot of losses before Boise State even gets considered.
Yeah, definitely. If there's any undefeated teams from these Power 5 conferences, they will get in over an undefeated Boise State. So these guys need a lot to go right for them, and a lot to go wrong for these other teams for them to even have a chance.
That's true. But another team I want to talk about is West Virginia. We talked about them a little bit earlier, and they've been kind of a dark horse actually throughout the season. No one expected them to be undefeated up to this point, especially when they play teams like BYU, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and then TCU. Wins over all of them. So they've shown themselves, again, to have a great defense. They have a great offense. Quarterback Skyler Howard has been tearing it apart in the Big 12 offense. And for me, I think they're one of the top. They have the top defense in the Big 12. They have a top 3 offense outside of Oklahoma and Texas Tech. And I think with that combo, they have a very, very strong chance to go possibly remain undefeated and make it into the playoffs.
See, I don't know if they're going to remain undefeated because their schedule that they still haven't faced features the hardest teams they'll have to play. They still haven't played Texas. They still haven't played Oklahoma. And finally, they end out the year against Baylor, who so far has looked pretty good. So I'm not entirely sure if they can still go undefeated. But while you said they are one of the few teams in the Big 12 who do play good defense, and they have an offense to match. So it's going to be interesting to see how this season shakes out for them.
I think West Virginia will probably need to remain undefeated to make the playoff. They're still not very highly ranked, even though they're undefeated right now. And obviously, they'll have a chance to climb as they play some of their better teams. But I think they have very little room for error because they didn't come into the season hyped at all. Even one slip-up, I think, would be enough to remove them from playoff contention.
Number 10 is pretty good, though, right now. And really, I don't like any of these teams. Oklahoma, great offense, poor defense. Baylor, great offense, poor defense. And I think West Virginia has that combo to shut these down. I think they're going to come away as Big 12 champions. And hopefully with these 5 wins and an undefeated resume, I think they could be the dark horse that makes the playoffs.
I think that, yes, if they go undefeated, if they win the Big 12 championship, they do have a very good shot at making the playoffs. They're an undefeated team. They've beaten some good teams if they do end up winning out. But I'm not sure if their defense, while good, is good enough to take down some of these offenses they faced. Oklahoma has looked very good this season, even with their couple losses. Baylor also has an absolutely fantastic offense. So we're really going to have to see if West Virginia's defense can keep them in these games.
All right, let's stay in the Big 12 for now and go to Baylor, as we've been talking about them. So far, their schedule has been even worse than West Virginia. They really have not played the other good Big 12 teams, with probably their best teams they've played so far being Oklahoma State and Iowa State. And they still have to play Texas, TCU, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia.
That's brutal.
That's a rough schedule. They returning QB Seth Russell, though. They have a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball, as we've said, and they have an explosive offense with 36 most yards, 7th most rushing yards. But I'm really not sure if their defense has it for them to go undefeated.
I agree with you. I've talked about this last time. Baylor does not have a good defense. They have a great offense with Shock Linwood. I love him as a running back, and he's been the heart and soul of their offense, with Seth Russell airing it out a lot too. So I think they're a great offense. That's why they're ranked number 8 right now. However, once they come to a real defense will expose them, and Baylor will be shut down.
See, that's true. They are ranked number 8 solely on the back of this offense. And really, their games boil down to, can we score more points than our defense lets up? But I think you're going to need a pretty good defense to stop this offense. They've looked explosive, and they've looked fantastic so far in the games they've played. But you're right, they still need to play West Virginia. They still need to play some of the better teams in their schedule. But I think if they win out and they win the Big 12, they have an almost guaranteed, or at least a very good chance of making a playoff spot.
I'd agree with that if they win out, great playoff chance, but I'd put their chances of going undefeated even less than West Virginia's. I'd say less than 5%, to be honest, right now. They still have such a strong schedule, and their defenses look pretty weak. We can't forget, this is almost supposed to be a rebuilding year for them with a new head coach. Even making it this far undefeated is a very big surprise. So they weren't expected to contend for a national title or a playoff berth this year. So just making it this far is very surprising, and I really would not expect them to make it further undefeated.
Head coach Jim Grobe has done a tremendous job with what's happened this past year, and you got to give him kudos. But now he's hitting the meat of the schedule, and I don't think he makes it out of there with 3 wins. Wow. I say he gets 2 at most.
Wow, I'm not quite as pessimistic as you guys, but I do think they're going to drop a game, maybe 2 against some of the better teams they face. I think they can close it against some of the weaker teams in their schedule, but you're right. Even with 1 or 2 losses, I think their playoff chances are basically gone. But I think making to a good bowl, doing well there, will be a highlight of what you guys said was supposed to be a pretty bad year for them. And next, we're going to move on to the Big Ten with a team that's near and dear to my heart, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, who so far have wins against Fresno State, Wyoming, Oregon, Northwestern, Illinois, Indiana, and Purdue. And the remainder of the schedule is going to be incredibly hard, facing Wisconsin, Ohio State, Minnesota, Maryland, and then finishing out against Iowa. What do you guys think? Can these guys go undefeated?
I don't envy that schedule. That's going to be brutal to come up. I mean, I think Minnesota, Maryland, those should be good wins for Nebraska for sure. I think they have the offensive powerhouse to take down Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, they got a great defense, but their offense, I don't think will stand to Nebraska's defense. The real test is going to come up against Ohio State. And it all comes down, Nebraska have a good enough defense to shut down Ohio State's offense?
That's true. That will be an interesting, battle. The offensive Ohio State with J.T. Barrett versus Nebraska defense. But I think on the other side of the ball, they will do very well with Tommy Armstrong Jr. showing some improvement, becoming a better passer to add to his running game, and running back Terrell Newby really showing himself this year. So, and like Ohio State has shown that, well, they are a bit weaker than we thought they were. They lost to Penn State, and I don't think it's out of the question that they lose to Nebraska, but it's going to be a very tall task for these guys.
Yeah, before last week, I would have said it was out of the question, pretty much. I would have said Ohio State. I'm taking them for sure. But after last week and them losing to Penn State, I think Nebraska definitely has a chance of upsetting them. They have a chance of beating Wisconsin, but I don't think it's likely they beat those two. They win the other 3 games, and they would win a Big Ten championship. So I'd say their chances of remaining undefeated are pretty low.
That's true. I think they don't have the greatest shot at remaining undefeated, but I don't know. I'm saying they get out of this with 2 losses, maybe to a toss-up against Wisconsin, probably a loss to Ohio State, but I think they went out the rest of their schedule, make it to a pretty good bowl this year, and they call it a good year with their second-year coach.
Yeah, last year in his first year coaching, they were one of the unluckiest teams in the country in close games at least, losing like 6 or 7 games on last-second touchdowns or by 1 score or less. So the luck's evening out a little bit, and I think it is definitely a good year for them. Even if they don't remain undefeated, 11-1, 10-2 would be great for a second-year head coach to really build on and maybe in future years compete for a national title.
I'm going with 11-1 here. I think Ohio State will be the only loss, and they'll make it to the conference championship and have a chance to prove themselves that they do belong in the playoffs. What they do with that chance, we'll have to see. But I love this Nebraska team, and I'm excited to see where they go with this. But let's talk about another team that's dear to my heart now, Washington. The Huskies, they have wins over Stanford, Arizona, Oregon State. They have been the peak of this Pac-12, and there's no other teams that have been close to them. Their quarterback, Jake Browning, and the running back, Myles Gaskin, they're the heart and soul of this Washington offense. And I've yet to see a team that can even come close to finding a way to shut this team down. So they have Utah, California, USC, and Arizona State as their first 4 games. And I think they blow them all out. The only team I think that will give them the problem, Washington State.
This is going to be interesting. I think they have a pretty good shot of going undefeated. Their strength of schedule for the remainder of the season isn't that much different than the one they faced so far, and they've absolutely destroyed the teams they play in Pac-12. Yeah. I think Utah won't be a challenge. Cal probably won't be a challenge. USC, I think, will be a bit closer than people are expecting, but Arizona State's an easy win, and like you said, Washington State will be their only real challenge so far. And I still think with the defense they've had and the offensive power they've shown so far, they'll manage to get through it pretty easily.
I think they're going to make it out without a loss as well. Stanford, obviously they're not as good as we thought they were, but they're still one of the better Pac-12 teams. Can we agree on that?
I agree.
And Washington absolutely destroyed them. And Washington State, they lost to an FCS team. I really don't see them taking down Washington. I just don't see that happening. I think Washington's going to make it to the playoff. Maybe not the most likely team, but I would slot them in right now. It's almost guaranteed, 85% chance.
Actually, I will go one further. I think as of right now, they are the most likely team to make the playoff at this point. If they play as they've been playing so far, they will go undefeated, probably be Pac-12 champions, and that almost guarantees you a bit into the playoffs.
If they go undefeated, we can.
Yeah, that's it. And it says more about the state of the Pac-12 than anything else that Washington State is their main challenge for the rest of their schedule.
What happens when Oregon and Stanford would duke it out for who wins the Pac-12 every year?
I'm glad we're past that now. And honestly, maybe we can expect to see Washington maybe have a couple of losses too. Like they lose to Utah this weekend, but win the championship, they still have an extremely strong chance. They've shown that they've been a top team so far. So 2 losses maybe, if we saw them lose to, let's say California and Utah, for example, I still say they have they'll make the playoffs as long as they win the Pac-12 championship.
I don't, because I really don't think they'd have any signature wins that would get them in there. The Pac-12, as we said, is weak right now. It's weaker than it's been in past years, and without any other top teams, I don't think a 2-loss team with no wins over great teams will make it in.
Yeah, I think with 2 losses, especially teams like Utah and Cal, while they're about mid-level teams in a weak Pac-12, I think those losses will just be pretty jarring to the committee, and I think that will almost immediately eliminate them from playoff contention. I think with 1 loss, they still have a chance, but they're really going to have to limit their mistakes if they want to get this playoff spot.
All right, let's continue going through the teams we're on the best teams right now, and let's go to Clemson. They made it to the playoff last year. They lost in the national title, and so far this year they have wins over Auburn, Georgia Tech, Louisville, and that close win over NC State 2 weeks ago. Left to play, they still have Florida State, Syracuse, Pittsburgh, and their annual rivalry game versus South Carolina. Deshaun Watson is he's a great quarterback. Maybe he hasn't lived up to some of his expectations, but he's still been amazing. His expectations were very, very high, to be fair. Do you think they're going to remain undefeated?
Their biggest competition is this weekend, Florida State. And even then, I don't think Florida State has a shot against them. Clemson, even though they lost a lot of talent to the draft and graduation, their defense came back still incredible. And for me, that was the big question mark, and they completely answered that over the last 7 games. Offense, obviously, surprisingly, regressed a little bit with Deshaun Watson not playing as well as he did last year. But even still, he's still an incredible quarterback, and he's led his team to wins over and over again. So I think I had them over Florida State, and after that, the rest of the schedule was a shoo-in outside the ACC championship. I'm going undefeated here.
See, I'm not sure if they can go undefeated. So far, as they've played some close games. One against Louisville, who is a very, very good team, but other close games against Auburn, who, as we've shown, are good, maybe not great. And finally, a very close win against NC State. So these guys, they're playing well. I think they are a very good team, but they're going to have to show just a little bit more consistency on both sides of the ball and in their performance to let me say, yes, they will go undefeated and they will beat all these teams. But I think we're really going to have to see how they play against Florida State, and if they can beat them resoundingly, they beat them they absolutely just control the game on both sides of the ball. I think then, yes, they will go undefeated. They'll go to the ACC championship and have a very good shot at winning.
I'm going to say they are going to beat Florida State resoundingly, but they're not going to go undefeated.
Ooh.
Florida State's best win right now, their marquee win is a win over 3 and 4 Ole Miss. I think Florida State is overrated right now, and I think Clemson will be able to handle them. But I think in the remaining 4 games, or an ACC title, if they go undefeated, they would make that, so 5 games. I think they're going to slip up once, though. They've had close calls to some of these teams Sanjay mentioned. I don't think they're going to be playing at 100% every game, and I think they're going to lose one.
I think they're the Florida State of a couple of years ago. They're always playing close games, but Jameis Winston always found ways to pull it out. I think Deshaun Watson's showing that same characteristic. He just wins. I'm happy to see that happen again.
So that Jameis Winston team, when they started playing that tough competition, like Oregon in the first round of the playoffs, was he still winning then?
Hey, Louisville was a tough team, and Deshaun Watson won against them.
No, I don't think Clemson's a bad team. I think they're a very good team. I think they're the best team in the ACC. I just think they've played pretty inconsistently so far. I see them slipping up one time and still getting into the playoffs.
Okay, I'll roll with that.
Sure, I could definitely see that happening. And finally, we go back to the team that now might be the best in the Big Ten, Michigan. So far, they've had wins against that Penn State team that beat OSU, a win 14-7 against Wisconsin, and then a couple more Big Ten wins against Rutgers and Illinois. But the remainder of the schedule is games against Michigan State, Maryland, Iowa, Indiana, and finally that marquee matchup against Ohio State. So far, what do you guys think? These defenses look great, but can it keep them undefeated and go to the playoffs?
After seeing Ohio State last week, I think Michigan has to be favored now versus them. Ohio State's offense had serious troubles versus Penn State, and Michigan's defense is much better than Penn State's. I think Michigan is going to roll through these early games. Michigan State, for example, is way down this year. Iowa, way down from last year. I think the game versus Ohio State, that's going to be a great game to watch, but I would take Michigan 70%, Ohio State 30%, something like that.
They guarantee an 11-0 start. It's just that question against Ohio State. it's very tough to see what happens between them. But I think Michigan, I've been saying undefeated for a lot of these past teams, and I'm going to continue that trend. Michigan goes undefeated. Their defense is just too good right now. I believe they have the #1 defense, allowing only 10 points a game. And that just, when you have that kind of level, you can have an atrocious offense and still have great games. Look at Wisconsin. Atrocious offense, great defense, and they're only 5-2. So, and Michigan has a slightly better, or not slightly, they have a much better offense than Wisconsin. So I'm going with Michigan having a strong undefeated schedule, winning the Big Ten championship, and being possibly the front runner for the national championship.
I think one of the risks that Michigan faces, though, is because Ohio State is also in their conference. If Michigan just slips up once to Ohio State, they likely will not make the playoff. And if Ohio State would make it then, I don't think the committee would put in both Ohio State and Michigan. So I think Michigan has, some of these other top teams can afford to slip up once. I think Michigan, if they can't lose to Ohio State and still make it in, I think.
That's true. Out of all these teams, Michigan has the lowest margin for error. They have to win all of their games leading up to the game against Ohio State, and then they have to beat Ohio State. But honestly, after last week, I think they are favored, and I think they will do it. And then their only real competition will be in the Big Ten championship. But whichever team they face there probably won't be as tough as Ohio State, even with this loss against Penn State. So I think they have an incredibly good shot of making the playoffs, and again, contending for that national championship.
Last, there's a team we've talked about a lot, and I think we all think they're the best team in the country, Alabama.
No
defending
question.
national champions. We've already talked with them a bunch on the show. We know they're great wins. They still have to play LSU, Mississippi State, and Auburn. They're going to go undefeated, right?
Yes.
SEC championship, Tennessee, Missouri again, maybe? No one stands a chance.
Do you think Tennessee even wants to play Alabama again?
Nobody wants to play them.
No, at this point, Alabama's looked like an absolute force. I thought that after they were undefeated already, Texas A&M was their best shot at a loss, and they trounced them. So honestly, they're going to go undefeated, but the only other small chance I see is Auburn. They've built up steam. They've looked pretty good, but I still don't think they're good enough to face this juggernaut of an Alabama team.
Yeah, when it's a rivalry game, the Iron Bowl, you never know what's going to happen, but Alabama's at home this year, and I think Auburn, as we've talked about their main strength, they're rushing. I think Alabama's good enough to shut that down. And on offense, I think Jalen Hurts, Damian Harris, they're good enough to run a bit on Auburn, and I think they're going to take that game pretty comfortably.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and along with Washington, these guys are the other team that's almost guaranteed a playoff spot. They've looked very good so far. They don't play as good teams going on. And in the SEC championship, their hardest opponent is a team they've already beaten by, 40 points? It's looking good for them.
So now looking back at the rankings we compiled from all the members of our studio, you can kind of tell from our base discussion who we like the best. And we'd come up with Alabama #1, Michigan 2, Clemson 3, Washington 4, and the biggest change, Louisville jumping back into the top 5 spot and possibly still competing for that playoff spot. And I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with this ranking list. You know, we've all been pretty high on these top 4 teams. With Louisville, possibly with Ohio State loss, Louisville definitely looks like the better team now.
That's true. So far, the top 4 teams, I think, really don't have any question of them. Alabama probably is the best team in the country. Michigan is incredible in the Big Ten, and they have a great defense. Clemson, well, they've won their games. They're going to stay where they are. And Washington doesn't really have any competition in its conference. The only real question here is the 5 spot, which I do think Louisville deserves. But after this week, we could see that change with Nebraska playing a good team in Wisconsin, and maybe some of the other teams that are ranked just outside the top 5 have a chance of breaking in.
Yeah, I'm normally a bit hesitant about putting a one-loss team over a horde of undefeated teams we talked about. But all those undefeated teams other than those top 4, they're all a lot weaker in terms of schedule than Louisville. There's no shame in losing to the #3 team in the country. It was a very, very close game. It could have gone either way. I think you could still be a top 5 team if you lose to the #3 team.
I agree with that. And now let's move on to the games we have going on this weekend. First off, we have #4 Washington taking on #17 Utah. And, you know, obviously we know a lot about Washington already, but Utah has a semi-explosive offense with Troy Williams, the quarterback, and Joe Williams, their running back, leading the Utes offense. And, you know, Utes, they're 6-1 right now. Their only loss came from the offensive powerhouse, California. So, for me, it's pretty easy to take Washington. I'm all in on there. I don't see them dropping this game.
Yeah, as I said before, I think Washington is a great team. I think they're going to win this one.
Yeah, honestly, there isn't much else to say. Washington looks like the best team in the Pac-12. Utah, while they've looked good, do have a loss in the Pac-12, and their offense has looked explosive at times, but is still a bit inconsistent with some growing pains. And I think the Washington defense is going to be more than good enough to shut them down. I think Washington wins.
Yeah, I think what's going to give Washington these wins when they're playing some of these Pac-12 teams is how good they are on both sides of the ball. And I think that strength on both offense and defense, even if one of them has an off day, Jake Browning's having a bad day, I think they can still grind out those wins, which I think is what separates them from Utah, for example.
And it's a 3:30 game, so you won't be having any of that Pac-12 night madness.
Yeah, who knows what happens at night? Anything can happen then.
It's true. But next, we're going to see a Big Ten showdown between number 7 Nebraska and number 11 Wisconsin. So far, Wisconsin has lost to Michigan and Ohio State, but honestly, those are two of the best teams in the Big Ten, and they still look like a strong team. But on the Nebraska side, they haven't really played any good teams. Their best win so far is probably against Oregon, who hasn't looked great after that. So this is going to really show if Nebraska deserves to be that number 7 team and maybe increase their ranking. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think right now this number 7 is a bit preliminary almost, even though we're more than halfway through the season, and that they have not played any of their best teams so far. So I think they deserve it. We talked with them before. Obviously, they were one of the undefeated teams. I think it's going to be a really tough game. I'm not sure who I'm going to pick, honestly.
I'm going Nebraska here. I'm not sold on Wisconsin's offense. They have a good defense, sure, but I mean, what are you going to do with that? Score with them?
I think they could shut down Nebraska with that. They held Michigan to 14 points. I think with Nebraska, this could be a low-scoring Big Ten game. This could be a very low-scoring game.
I'll go one further. I think this will be a low-scoring Big Ten game, but I think Nebraska's offense, with Tommy Armstrong Jr. doing pretty well in the passing game and with a horde of very good wide receivers this year, I think they'll be good enough to surmount this Wisconsin defense, while the Nebraska defense is going to be more than enough to take care of what's been like a middling offense in Wisconsin. I'm going with the Cornhuskers here.
All right. For our final game we're going to talk about next week, Clemson versus Florida State. Florida State, I don't think they're that great of a team with their marquee win over Ole Miss, like I said before, but I think this would be a great chance for them to get back in the ACC title race and maybe get back into the playoff race.
You know, they've shown they had losses, horrible losses to Louisville and UNC, North Carolina. And, you know, if Dalvin Cook and their quarterback, DeAndre Francois, they can show them that, you know, we do have that good offense. We do have that good defense. We can take down the top ACC team who beat Louisville. So this is their chance to prove it. We can do this. But unfortunately, I don't think they have it in them. I'm going with the Clemson here.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Tigers also. I think Florida State, I don't think very highly of them. I think 12 ranking, I think that's too high for them. I think they should be even lower with how they've played so far and the teams they've played.
Honestly, I'm going to agree with Lee here. That 12 ranking is honestly too high for them. And especially in their losses, especially against Louisville, really show that this team, they're good. They're not great. They have some issues on the defense, and their offense has troubles at times. So I think Clemson is going to take this game and show that they are the best team in the ACC.
All right, time for some quick takes. First one, number 14, Florida in Georgia, in a neutral site, Everbank Stadium. Who do you got?
Florida. I think I think they are a better team, and honestly, I'm saying that entirely because Georgia is the team that lost to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Florida as well.
I'm going Georgia here. I don't like Florida at all. Plus, I love seeing Georgia with Jacob Eason. I think they will learn from the mistakes, convert from field goals to touchdowns. I'm going Georgia here.
If Florida wins this game, do you think they're in the driver's seat to make it to Atlanta and get that right to lose to Alabama by 30 points in the SEC title?
I think that is their privilege.
That's true. It's them or Tennessee at this point, honestly. And then our next game, number 8 Baylor against the unranked Texas. What do you guys got?
All right, so Texas so far this year, they're supposed to be back. They beat Notre Dame. That was supposed to be a marquee victory. But obviously Notre Dame's proved to be a bad team. But I'm still going Texas for this win. I think they're going to take down Baylor, and Charlie Strong's going to get that signature victory he's been waiting 3 years for.
I'm picking Baylor here. I think Texas, again, this was supposed to be a good year for them. It started out looking like it would be. It kind of fell apart after that. I don't think Charlie Strong can coach up his team to compete with this Baylor offense. Baylor.
This Texas team is so undisciplined. I don't like Charlie Strong as a coach. I think he needs to be gone. I'm rolling with Baylor here.
All right, final game, Auburn Ole Miss.
Auburn, I mean, we've seen what they do to weak teams. I think Ole Miss is a weak team. I
Yeah.
think Arkansas was a weak team. Auburn's going to roll over Ole Miss.
That's true. If last week was any indication, what Auburn can do to mid-level SEC teams is absolutely horrific. I'm going Auburn here. Maybe not by as much as last week, but it's going to be a pretty bad game for Ole Miss.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the under. They're going to win this game by less than 53 points. But I definitely think they're going to win pretty solidly. I think they're going to run all over Ole Miss.
Well, that's all we have for tonight. We have been your hosts, Evan Mercer.
Lee Johnson.
And Sanjay Ramaprasad.
And that wraps up another terrific night of Any Given Tuesday. Have a good week, everybody, and come back here at 7 o'clock for another episode of Any Given Tuesday.